South Korea's government has spent somewhere in the region of 280 trillion Korean won, roughly 200 billion US dollars, trying to convince its citizens to have more children. That is $200 billion in subsidies, child care benefits, housing incentives, cash payments for new babies, and a national fertility campaign that has run, in various forms, for nearly 2 decades. The result of all that spending is that South Korea's fertility rate in 2023 fell to 0.72 children per woman, the lowest figure ever recorded for any country not at war or experiencing a famine. Somewhere between inception and the $200 billion mark, something went wrong. Or more precisely, something went right for individual South Koreans making entirely rational decisions about their own lives, and catastrophically wrong for the aggregate economy those decisions are collectively building. So let us work through a few key questions. What does a fertility rate of 0.72 actually mean for an economy in concrete mechanical terms? Why has $200 billion of government incentive spending produced essentially no change in behavior? What are the second and third order economic effects that go well beyond the obvious labor shortage? And is South Korea an extreme case of a unique problem? Or is it the leading edge of something that most developed economies are going to be dealing with in the coming decades? To understand why a fertility rate of 0.72 is different in kind, not just degree, from the rates we normally talk about in Western demographic discussions, you need to understand what replacement rate means and why it matters economically. Think of it like a company's employee base. If your company loses 15% of its workforce every year to retirement, and it only hires 10% replacements, the company gets smaller, steadily, predictably, compoundingly smaller. The workforce does not just shrink. The ratio of experienced workers to new hires shifts. Institutional knowledge concentrates in an aging cohort, and eventually you reach a point where the retirement wave overwhelms the hiring pipeline entirely. That is the replacement rate problem in corporate form. For a country, the equivalent is a fertility rate of 2.1 children per woman, the number required, accounting for infant mortality, to keep the population stable. South Korea is at 0.72. For every 100 South Koreans alive today, the next generation contains roughly 36 people, the generation after that, about 13. This is not a projection model with wide error bars. The children who will make up the South Korean workforce of 2045 have already been born, or not born. The trajectory is, in that sense, largely predetermined. The working age population, the people between 15 and 64 who pay taxes, contribute to pension systems, consume goods, and produce economic output, is projected to fall from 37 million today to 17 million by 2060. South Korea will have lost more than half its workforce in a single generation. By 2040, the working age share of the total population falls from 72% to 56%, and the fiscal cost of health, long-term care and pensions is projected by the Center for Economic Policy Research to more than double to 17.4% of GDP by 2060, paid for by that shrinking workforce. The Bank of Korea has flagged the possibility of a permanent recession beginning in the 2040s if current trends continue. The National Pension Fund currently holds $730 billion. By most actuarial projections, it is depleted by the 2050s. For pension sustainability, you generally need somewhere between 2 and 3 workers per retiree. South Korea is on track to have less than 1. Now here is where the economic paradox gets genuinely strange and worth slowing down on. South Korea's GDP is still growing. The economy is still, by most conventional measures, functioning. How is that possible if the workforce is shrinking? The answer is productivity. And it is, in some ways, the most interesting and underappreciated part of this story. A smaller workforce can produce the same or greater output if it becomes sufficiently more productive per worker. South Korea has been investing heavily in automation, robotics, and artificial intelligence, partly as a direct response to the anticipated labor shortage. The GDP number can keep going up even as the number of people generating it goes down, at least for a while. But, and this is a significant but, productivity growth cannot offset the fiscal arithmetic of a pension and healthcare system designed for a much larger population of working-age payers. The output might hold up. The social contract built around a different demographic reality almost certainly will not. The question of why the government spending has not worked is perhaps the most economically interesting part of this story, because the answer reveals something important about the limits of financial incentives as a policy tool. The South Korean government has essentially been trying to bribe its citizens into having children. And the reason it has not worked is not that the incentives are too small, though they probably are, but that the underlying cost-benefit calculation of having a child in South Korea has changed structurally in ways that cash payments cannot easily offset. Housing costs in Seoul are among the highest in Asia relative to income. The education system runs on an extraordinarily competitive private tutoring culture. The private tutoring market, known as Hagwon, represents a significant additional household expenditure per child on top of standard schooling. Women's workforce participation has risen sharply, which means the opportunity cost of stepping back from a career to have children has risen sharply with it. And South Korean working culture, long hours, rigid hierarchies, limited flexibility, makes combining a career and a family genuinely difficult. $200 billion in cash incentives has not moved those structural realities. Now, a fair Steelman of the counter-argument is that the picture may be less apocalyptic than the projections suggest, and this case has real merit. South Korea's fertility rate actually ticked up to 0.74 in 2024 and 0.80 in 2025, and marriages rose by 8.1% in 2025 after a record 14.8% jump in 2024. The government's optimistic projection has the fertility rate crossing 1.0 by 2031. If that trajectory holds, the working-age population decline would be less severe than the worst-case models imply. Immigration, which South Korea has historically resisted as a demographic fix, is increasingly being discussed as a partial solution. And productivity growth from AI and automation could, in theory, substantially offset the labor force contraction in terms of raw economic output. But the honest demographer's response to the recent uptick is caution rather than relief. Nicholas Eberstadt of the American Enterprise Institute, one of the most cited researchers on Korean demographics, has noted that the desired family size in South Korea remains well below the replacement rate, meaning that even the recent improvement likely reflects a bounce back from pandemic-era delays, rather than a genuine structural shift in how South Koreans think about family formation. The population, under every scenario, is expected to start declining in 2025 and will fall from 51.7 million today to somewhere around 36 million by 2072 under Statistics Korea's central projection. That is a 30% decline in the population of a top 10 global economy. What South Korea probably represents, in the end, is not an isolated curiosity, but an early and unusually severe version of a problem that Japan, Italy, Germany, China, and much of Southern and Eastern Europe are navigating in less extreme form. The countries that grew rich fastest and whose women gained economic opportunity fastest tend to show the sharpest fertility declines, because the work-family trade-off sharpens most acutely when both economic opportunity and the cost of housing and education are high simultaneously. South Korea just got there first and got there hardest. Whether it finds a way through via technology, immigration, cultural change, or some combination, will be one of the more instructive economic experiments of the next 30 years to watch. And yes, I am aware that framing the question of whether people choose to have children as an economic experiment is the kind of sentence that makes demographers wince and human beings feel vaguely dehumanized. The honest admission is that demographic analysis has a tendency to turn deeply personal decisions about relationships, careers, housing, and family into aggregate data points in a model. The individual South Korean woman who decides not to have a child because she cannot afford both her mortgage and a private tutor, or because her employer will not accommodate a pregnancy without derailing her career, is making a perfectly rational choice given her circumstances. The tragedy, if that is the right word, is that millions of individually rational choices can aggregate into a collectively difficult outcome. And no amount of economic modeling quite resolves the tension between those two levels of analysis.